Hi, good to see everybody. So we've got Jenny and Tracy with us today, seeing if they like the class. And we've also got, so it's also the start of a new project, if you want to start a new project. So lots of you, we've all been working on portraits, and lots of you have been working at that, and some still working on that and carrying on, which is absolutely fine if you need another few weeks on that. I thought I would introduce a new theme this week and really start to have a look at textures. So this could be any kind of paint really. I'll probably just focus on acrylics and oils today because I haven't really sorted my watercolours out, and that might be a bit too much anyway. So maybe have a look at the water-based medium flat watercolours next week. So textures. And then I'm thinking in a couple of weeks' time, the short project of Derelict, sort of on a Derelict thing is coming up. And I was thinking that if you wanted, you could combine the two. So that's that. So there is a folder somewhere with 1 or 2 Derelict images, and I will print a few more off. I've got 1 or 2 others that I've taken since so it's a project that we did in the distant past, and these were a couple of the demos that I did for that particular project. So we were really kind of looking at derelict cars and things like that. So that was another one. I was thinking actually it does fit in pretty well with the textured project, because in this particular demo, I've used quite a lot of different textures. I've used some quite thin paint here. So, you're getting some of the colour, and I think this is an acrylic one, some of the colour, the background colour. So that's one thing you can think about. So in terms of texture, there's the texture of the actual ground you're working on. So some boards, like this one, is a fairly smooth board. This has got a little bit of a tooth anyway, so you can pick some of that up. Got some splattered texture here, got some sort of like knife work here, a bit of impasto paint there. So impasto is like thicker paint. That's couple of examples there of different textures. So I thought I'd just show you a few. These are all old demos. Looking at things like the surface you're painting on to start with, this one actually started with a bit of collage. So you could start with texturing the board or the canvas you're working with sticking something onto it, either collage or some sort of paste or something like that, and then painting over the top. So having a textured ground. So that's one idea. We'll go through these. This one was really looking at different brushwork. So we've got some sort of dry brush here. This area here, I've basically cut paint down and then kind of scratched into it. So that's another kind of texture. That kind of scratch. I can't remember what that's called, but it begins with S. That's it. That's So that would be a good thing. There's a little bit of palette knife, so I think I've used probably the edges of the palette knife to get these nice sharp marks. So and I'll do it very quickly in a minute. So that's a little bit on that particular one. Similar sort of thing here on these areas. So this one's got thinner textures where you can see some of the colour of the ground showing through, plus thicker paint. This one I thought was quite a nice little example, just a simple painting of a shed. And I've used quite a lot of this, I think I did with a palette knife, actually painting on with a palette knife, and then scraping some of the paint back, which reveals some of the texture of the canvas. So that can look quite nice. And then again, rather random bits of texture applied with a palette knife, using perhaps a bigger palette knife. And I've got quite a lot of different knives here, as well as things like credit cards. You can almost like sort of pick up a bit of paint with a credit card and paint it on. So that's quite good if you want sort of edges. So there's a whole range of knives there. One of the other textures is one that one of these ones. So this sort of thing is created by sort of splattering the paint, maybe like with a toothbrush or another kind of brush. So that's another way of sort of creating textures to get various splatters. So that's that one. This one was using a similar sort of thing. I think all that was painted with a palette knife, but actually had quite a pink, bright coloured colour underneath. That can look quite nice. Sometimes just having little specks of colour showing through, you know, leaving some of the ground colour, or you know, don't have to be pink, but you could pick a colour that's different to the colours you're going to use, and that can sometimes create a liveliness in the painting that you wouldn't achieve otherwise. It's moving away a little bit from very naturalistic subjects, naturalistic looks, but you can create some quite interesting paint effects that create a liveliness that you might not have otherwise. So that's that one. This one was a little still life. Again, that's all palette knife. So just a few samples. That one was of a boat. Again, all palette knife work. This was sort of using big brushes. I thought I'd show that one just because it was all painted with a brush about that wide, and I just wouldn't have got it looking quite like that if I'd used very smooth little brushes. So, you know, sometimes the brushes used are very important for creating and suggesting different textures. So again, you know, just experimenting with different brushes. So that's pretty much most of the examples I've got there, I think. All good so far?
Yeah.
Good questions? Yeah. So yeah, I didn't really have, I'll do a tiny bit of a demo, very random. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, so yeah, that's just out of it. Something like that. I mean, so something like acrylics I would probably use. Sometimes it's worth just putting some sort of colour everywhere, maybe and letting that dry, then you've got something to work on. One thing I find with the palette knife painting is you do get through a lot of paint, but it's bigger, broader marks, something like that, but it's quite nice. Say for something like a tree, I can sort of almost like sort of pick up some of the texture of the canvas itself, which is quite nice, a little bit like that. Or I can put thicker colours on, and try a bit of yellow. Put some yellows in there. Like that. So it might be that you want to leave some areas thick, other areas you might want to just keep very, very thin. So one thing you could do is just, rather than take on a whole painting, is maybe just a few little studies, and maybe try one tree or something like that, or one car. You know, just experiment with the kind of paint effects you can get. Be a bit playful with it. Don't be too worried about painting a masterpiece straight away. You know, work your way up to it. Have fun with it. So that's really what I would suggest. Try out the different marks. So that would be one kind of mark. And as I say, another one would be using the knives on their edges. I haven't got enough paint out here. Let's get that bit out. So you can create. Is that going to work? Let's put that on the palette. So you can spread that out a little bit on a palette. And I should then be able to just pick up little bits on the edge. That's better. So, you know, just sharp marks, you know, they can be quite handy. Yeah. So yeah, have a play, have an experiment, and then think about, you know, you might have a couple of images that you're thinking you might want to paint. Maybe try little bits of different ones, and then decide on which is the most appealing. Does that sound all right? Yeah. So yeah, so that'd be my suggestion for today. Maybe oils or acrylics today if you wanted to. Okay. Anybody want to ask anything? All good? Okay. If anybody wants to use any of these palette knives, you're very welcome. Texture. I'll leave those there.